Welcome everybody. We're beginning Unit 8 today. This is the first section in Unit 8. It's Module 37, looking at the major theories of motivation. So I think these are pretty interesting. Sometimes they're a little bit tricky to tell apart given a scenario, so pay close attention. I usually start discussion of this section with just a quick ask of students. I just have them jot down a list of reasons. Why are you here? And when I mean that, like, why are you in AP Psychology? Why are you in this room? Or if you're online at home, why are you listening to this lecture? Why did you choose this class? Why are you doing this as opposed to, watching Netflix? So why are you doing what you're doing? And then at the end, after we look at the theories, maybe take a minute and see if you can connect those to some of the reasons that you wrote down. So maybe take 30, 60 seconds, write them down, or at least think about them, and then we'll come back to them at the end. First thing, make sure that you know the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. We talked about this a little bit in Unit 7, Module 34, and how intrinsic motivation is so much more powerful long term. If you really want to get someone to change their behavior long term, intrinsic motivation is the way to go. And how extrinsic motivators, doing things because of the reward or the money, it can actually hurt creativity. It can actually, if you rely too much on extrinsic motivation, it can actually hurt intrinsic motivation, which again is doing things because you enjoy them, not for the money, not for the rewards. So getting into the actual theories themselves, the first one is the instinct theory. And so an instinct is a behavior that's rigidly patterned throughout a species. So all members of this species generally do this behavior. A lot of times if you see a test question, it's going to be something with an animal. Why do birds build a nest, or why do bears hibernate? Because humans don't really have a lot of proven instincts. There might be some things that people might speculate and say, oh, I think that's a human instinct as to why we do this. But it sure is hard to prove because it's, that idea of being rigidly patterned. There might be some trends about why most people in our species might find certain features attractive in another person. But the thing is, people are different in their opinions and their likes and dislikes. So I don't know that you can really go to the next step and call that an instinct. So again, a lot of times this is going to be more with animals, but the degree to which humans have instincts is hotly debated in psychology. But you could think about some things like motherly instincts and those kind of things, but they're really hard to prove for humans. But when this was a big theory around 100 years ago, and they suggested that human behavior is basically biological, genetic, and like you're born the way you are, and there's no way to change and anything like that. Obviously, that is not true. Like there's a lot of things you can change. To be fair, though, when we look at nature and nurture of behavior, there are a lot of things that are at least predominantly genetic. A lot of our core personality, things like are we outgoing or reserved, and some of our core personality, a lot of those genetics do play a role, but it's not like 100% of that role. So that's kind of the big thing on instincts. And so again, these aren't really used a lot with humans, but occasionally. Getting into like this idea of balance and motivation, you're going to see this term a lot in this unit, this idea of homeostasis. So this is where humans try to maintain some kind of a balance. So this can be physical, like you eat just enough food to avoid hunger, but it can also be cognitive too. So things like if you are really exerting yourself mentally, you get to a point where like, oh man, I need a break. On the other hand, if you're not doing much to challenge your mind, after a while, you get bored. And so you seek challenge, you seek some level of sensation seeking. So you can have both mental and physical homeostasis that you might try to seek. And those are terms that'll be important with some of these other theories. Um, the drive reduction theory. So this is the idea that we have a physiological need. So think about what kind of physiological needs we have. Food, water, sleep. Some people would argue sex. Now, it's not a thing where you're going to die if you don't have sex, but I think we could all agree that there's at least a desire. So need might be a strong word for sex, but there's at least a desire. And if you don't engage in these behaviors, if you don't eat, if you don't drink, if you don't eat, you get hungry. If you don't drink, you get thirsty. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this. If you don't sleep, you get tired. So it creates some kind of an aroused tension state. It creates a drive. So that lack of food creates the drive of hunger. And then this motivates you to satisfy the need. It motivates you to get off the couch and go get food, or get in your car and drive to a restaurant. It's motivating your behavior. So a lot of times with this one, people get hung up on the word drive. And they're like, oh yeah, that person, they're driven. Don't think of it like, oh, I'm motivated. This is more like you have a physiological need and then you do something to reduce that. So this one pretty much has to be something physiological. You're trying to reduce this, this impulse. Again, this one has to be biological. This one can't be cognitive. There's a different theory for the cognitive one. You can see here, food, water, if think body temperature, if you get too hot, your body will start to sweat to bring you back down to homeostasis, to bring you back down to that, is it 98.6, whatever the average temperature is supposed to be. We talked about how sex drive could fit here. I would probably go ahead and lump it in there. So again, we're trying to maintain a constant or balanced internal state. Another one is the optimum arousal theory. This one kind of goes with cognitive homeostasis. So you seek an optimum level of stimulation. So again, like I said earlier, if you are really exerting yourself, you're having a hard day at school or at work, your mind is just tired, you might try to just go home and do something mindless. If you've been sitting around doing nothing all day, you might try to do something that's more challenging or sensation seeking. This is where boredom comes into play. If you're scared, you might say, oh, get me out of here. So your arousal's too high, you're going to try to bring that arousal down. At the bottom of this slide, it says the amount of arousal sought differs by individual. So some people like a lot of arousal, a lot of stimulation in their life. They like things, something always going on. They like the drama, the things are just always happening. And then other people just want things to be more chill. So everybody has a little bit different ideal for what this is. There's a sensation-seeking quiz in this lesson that I would encourage you to check out just to kind of see some examples of people that might want high arousal versus low arousal. This is such an important topic right here, and I think this has helped a lot of students over the years when they learn about this. The Yerkes-Dodson law. So we're talking about the relationship between one's arousal and their performance on a task. And extensive research has been done here, but what they found is basically we do best when our arousal is at moderate levels. So if we have really low arousal, we're too tired, we're too drowsy, we're not really focused, we're just kind of like whatever. But if your arousal's too high, then you're nervous, you're anxious. And if you've ever been nervous or anxious before a big test or a performance, you might think, oh man, I didn't really do my best there. Or maybe I got nervous and I forgot some words, or I forgot the answer to a question or whatever. So you want to be right in that moderate level. To take it a step further, they've actually found it depends on the task as well. So I don't know if you can probably see this chart here, but I know that my mug has covered up some part of it. But basically, for more difficult tasks, difficult mentally, so things that are challenging for you, like taking a really difficult test, or maybe giving a difficult performance or a speech or something like that. Difficult tasks, you want to be at a lower level of arousal. You want to be calm and relaxed. And then if it's an easy task for you, you can be at a higher level of arousal. Right here, you can be at a higher level. So if it's something just like manual labor, like I'm not saying manual labor is easy, I'm saying it's not mentally challenging. So then again, this all has to do with how mentally challenging something is. Think about like playing golf. It's athletic, but it's more like you just have to be really, really focused. You want to be at a low level of arousal. If you're going to run a sprint, you want to be at a higher level of arousal. It's, you know how to run. It's just a matter of having enough energy to do it. I think I have some examples on the next slide here. So take a second, look at these, maybe hit pause, see if you can guess, and then we'll go through them. Okay, so if we look at these, do you want to be at a lower end or higher end? Doing the dishes, that shouldn't be mentally challenging. You want to be at the higher end. Taking a final exam, probably want to be at the lower end. That, for a lot of classes, that's going to be difficult. Giving a speech at graduation, giving speeches is one of the most common phobias, fears for people. You want to be calm, you want to be relaxed. Going for a jog, not mentally taxing, physically difficult, but not mentally, so you want to be higher. Being asked questions at a job interview, that can be pretty intimidating, that could be scary. You want to be calm. Doing open heart surgery, if you're a doctor someday, you don't want your surgeon kind of being jittery and, what do I do next? You want them to look calm, cool, collected, they know what they're doing. So just try to understand the relationship between your arousal level and your performance. Incentive theory, this is pretty straightforward, a positive or negative environmental stimulus. So if you give people things, they might want to do it. So like if you give people rewards, they might be more likely to do something, or they might do it to avoid being punished. Think about food. Obviously, food helps reduce drives, but if that was the only reason we ate food, we would all eat super healthy, like, no sugar, that kind of thing. But think about why we eat junk food, or why do we go back for the 5th slice of pie? Because it tastes good. There's an incentive to the taste of good food. So, again, this could be money, it could be rewards. Kind of think about extrinsic motivators. And then Maslow's hierarchy. You've probably seen this in other classes, but you do want to just kind of make yourself familiar with these without reading them all to you. The basic premise is that you need to have the lower needs met before you can have the higher needs met. So the first thing you got to meet is the physiological needs. Here at the bottom, I don't know if they're cut off for you, but food, water, drink, sleep, got to meet those before you can even worry about the next level. Safety, feeling like the world is safe and organized, like where am I sleeping tonight? Do I have a roof over my head? Am I worried about being, abused? Belongingness and love, do people care about me? Do I have friends? Those kind of things. Self-esteem, do I like myself? Do I think I'm good at things? Do I get recognized? Do people approve of me? And then self-actualization, am I living up to my greatest potential? We don't really get into self-transcendence too much, and you can look it up, but basically if you can get to here, you're good. Have a basic understanding of the order of these. You might see like one question that asks you, but big idea is just kind of understand you need to have the lower needs met before you have the higher needs met. So think about how this could relate to, a student in class. So think about from a teacher's perspective. If I have a student who is hungry or thirsty or doesn't feel safe or is getting bullied, are they really going to be worried about, learning psychology vocab? There's a big saying in teaching, you got to worry about Maslow before you worry about, other things. So it's a big thing that gets talked about a lot in teaching and other, helping fields. So I'm about ready to run out of time, but those are the major theories. So watch this, bring any questions you got to class, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.